She didn't come to the corridor to break down. She just needed somewhere the world couldn't see her fall apart. But the moment her knees buckled against the cold brick wall, a man stepped out of the shadows and said, calm and lethal, "You shouldn't be here alone." The corridor in the luxury building was long and silent, the kind of place where marble absorbs sound and dim lights made everything feel like a bad dream. Emergency exit signs glowed green at both ends. Security cameras blinked red overhead. It was supposed to be safe. It was a normal Friday evening for everyone except for her. Lavinia Duca stood alone against the wall, one hand pressed to the brick to steady herself, the other gripping her phone like it was the only proof her life had just imploded. The screen still showed the same message. 3 lines from her fiancé, cold and final, sent while she was at work. "I can't do this anymore. I'm done. Don't contact me." The betrayal wasn't just romantic. It was tactical. It was humiliating. It was everything at once. She had paid for the engagement party herself last month. She had co-signed the estate deed he insisted would be our future investment. She had ignored the late-night phone calls, the sudden business trips, the way he'd grown distant over the past 6 months. Now she knew why. Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Now let's jump right back in. He hadn't just left her. He'd used her, and she'd been too graceful, too trusting, too desperate to believe in something good to see it coming. So she did what a lot of broken people do. She walked away from the party upstairs, took the service corridor down 3 floors, and let herself feel it all in private where no one could watch her cry. The first sob hurt. The second one broke something inside her. The third was about to pull her under. That's when the wrong men found her. "Well, well, Lavinia Duca!" The voice came from the service entrance at the far end of the hall. 2 men stepped out of the shadows, both in dark coats, both moving with the kind of confidence that said they knew exactly who she was and why they were there. She froze. "Please," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I don't want any trouble." The taller one smiled, but it wasn't kind. "Too late for that, sweetheart. Your name's on a very expensive piece of paper. And we're here to collect." She didn't understand. Didn't know what paper. Didn't know who they were. The alcohol she'd had upstairs at the party made her head spin. The corridor tilted. One of the men reached for her arm. Then everything stopped. "Touch her," a voice said from behind them, low, steady, absolute, and you lose the hand. The voice came from the opposite end of the corridor. Deep. Italian. Not loud, but the kind of voice that made men freeze before they even turned around. Lavinia's head snapped up. A man stood 15 feet away, emerging from the shadows like he'd been there the entire time. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a perfectly tailored black suit that looked like it cost more than her rent. His dark hair was slicked back. His beard was immaculate. But it was his eyes that held her, gray-blue, piercing, focused with the kind of intensity that said he missed nothing. A tattooed sleeve of roses, skulls, and geometric patterns covered his right arm, visible where his cuff had pulled back. Another small tattoo peeked above his collar. He didn't look like a savior. He looked like something far more dangerous. The 2 men turned, and their confidence evaporated. "Mr. Butcho," the taller one said, stepping back. "We didn't know she was." "She's mine," Marco Butcho said, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. "Which means you just made a very bad mistake." He moved forward, slow and deliberate, his polished shoes echoing against the marble. He didn't pull a weapon. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The men exchanged a glance, then turned and disappeared back through the service entrance without another word. Lavinia's heart hammered in her chest. She pressed herself harder against the wall, trying to make sense of what just happened. Marco stopped 3 feet away, his eyes scanning her face with an expression that was unreadable. Concern, calculation, something darker she couldn't name. "You're Lavinia Duca," he said. Not a question. She nodded, barely breathing. "And you have no idea what your ex-fiancé just did to you." Her throat tightened. "What are you talking about?" Marco's jaw tightened. "The estate he convinced you to co-sign. He used it as collateral for a debt he owes to people who don't forgive and don't forget. The moment he walked away from you, he made you the target." The words hit her like ice water. "No," she whispered. That's not. He wouldn't. He did. Marco's voice softened just slightly, but his eyes stayed hard. And now there are 3 organizations in this city who think you're worth €500,000. Those men weren't here to talk. Lavinia's knees buckled. She would have fallen if Marco hadn't stepped forward and caught her by the arm, his grip firm but not cruel. I don't understand, she said, her voice breaking. I don't know anything about debts, or whatever this is. I just got dumped in a text message and I know. His voice was quieter now, almost gentle. And I'm sorry, but right now you have 2 choices. You can go back upstairs, pretend this didn't happen, and wait for the next crew to find you. Or you can come with me, and I'll make sure no one touches you again. She looked up at him, her hazel eyes filled with tears and confusion and fear. Why? She asked. Why do you care? Marco's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Something old and painful and buried deep. Because I've seen what happens to women who get used as collateral, he said quietly. And I didn't feel like watching it again. He released her arm and stepped back, giving her space. So what's it going to be, Lavinia? She looked down the corridor. Empty. Silent. Cold. She looked back at Marco. Dangerous. Controlled. Certain. She swallowed hard. Okay, she whispered. Marco nodded once, then gestured toward the exit. My car's downstairs. Stay close to me. As they walked through the corridor together, Lavinia's mind raced. She didn't know who this man was. Didn't know why he'd been watching her. Didn't know what kind of world she was stepping into. But she knew one thing for certain. Her normal life had just ended, and his world of shadows had just begun. Marco's hand hovered near the small of her back, not touching but close enough that she felt the heat of his presence. Protective. Possessive. The distinction didn't matter right now, because both meant she was safer than she'd been 60 seconds ago. They passed under one of the dim corridor lights, and Lavinia caught sight of his profile. The sharp line of his jaw. The way his eyes scanned every shadow, every doorway, like he was calculating threats she couldn't even see. This was a man who lived in a world where danger wasn't an exception. It was the baseline. The service entrance, Marco said, his voice low. We're taking the back route to the garage. Why not the elevator? She asked, her voice still shaky. Because elevators have cameras that feed to security offices where people get paid to look the other way. He glanced at her. And I don't trust anyone in this building except myself. The service entrance door was heavy, reinforced steel painted the same cream as the walls. Marco pushed it open with one hand and guided her through. The stairwell on the other side was concrete and cold, utilitarian, in a way the rest of the building wasn't. Their footsteps echoed as they descended. Lavinia's heels clicked against the steps. She stumbled once, her ankle turning, and Marco caught her elbow without breaking stride. Careful, he said. I'm fine. You're not. But you will be. 3 flights down, they reached the parking garage. The air was thick with the smell of oil and exhaust. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in sickly yellow. A few luxury cars sat in designated spots, dark and silent. Marco led her toward the far corner where a black sedan waited, sleek and understated. The kind of car that didn't attract attention but cost more than most people made in a year. As they approached, the driver's side door opened. A man stepped out, older, maybe 50, with silver threading through his dark hair. He wore a black suit similar to Marco's, but without the edge of menace. His eyes went to Lavinia, assessing, then back to Marco. Boss, he said. We clear. For now, Marco replied. Angelo, this is Lavinia. She'll be staying with us for a while. Angelo nodded. No questions, no hesitation. Understood. He moved to open the rear passenger door, but Marco was already there, his hand on the handle. He pulled it open and looked at Lavinia. Get in. She hesitated. The reality of what she was doing hit her all at once. She was getting into a car with a man she didn't know, a man who'd claimed her as his in front of armed strangers, a man whose name made hardened criminals retreat without a fight. Lavinia! Marco's voice was softer now, patient. Those men will be back. And next time I might not be there. She thought about her apartment, her things, her life. None of it mattered if she was dead. She got in. The interior smelled like leather and something faintly citrus. The seats were soft, expensive. Marco slid in beside her, close enough that she felt the weight of him, the controlled power in every movement. Angelo closed the door and returned to the driver's seat. The engine purred to life. "Where are we going?" Lavinia asked, her hands twisted together in her lap. "Somewhere safe," Marco said. "That's not an answer." He looked at her, really looked at her, and for a moment she saw something beneath the dangerous exterior. Exhaustion, maybe, or the weight of too many decisions made in corridors like the one they'd just left. "My estate," he said finally. "It's outside the city. Fortified. No one gets in unless I allow it." "You mean I'm going to be a prisoner?" "I mean you're going to be alive." His voice was firm but not unkind. "There's a difference." Angelo pulled the car out of the parking spot, navigating through the garage with practiced ease. They passed a security booth where a guard sat reading a magazine, not even looking up as they drove by. Marco was right. Everyone here had been paid to look the other way. They emerged onto the street. The city lights blurred past the tinted windows. Lavinia watched the world she knew slip away, block by block. Her apartment was 20 minutes north. Her job, or what used to be her job, was downtown. Her friends, her routines, everything that made her life hers was out there somewhere unreachable now. "What about my things?" she asked quietly. "What do you need?" "Clothes. Toiletries. My laptop." Marco pulled out his phone, typed something quickly. "I'll have someone collect them. Give Angelo your address and keys." She stared at him. "You're sending strangers into my home?" "I'm sending professionals who won't steal from you or leave evidence they were there." He pocketed his phone. "Unless you prefer to go yourself and take your chances with whoever's watching your building right now." Lavinia's stomach turned. "They're watching my apartment?" "If they're smart, yes. Your ex left you exposed, Lavinia. Everyone who wants a piece of what he owes knows your name, your address, your routines. You're not safe anywhere except with me." The words should have terrified her. Maybe they did. But beneath the fear was something else. Anger. At her ex-fiancé for using her. At herself for not seeing it. At the cruel efficiency of a world that could turn her into collateral without her knowledge or consent. "How long have you been watching me?" she asked. Marco didn't flinch. 3 weeks. "Why?" "Because I knew this was coming. Your ex borrowed from the wrong people, and I knew eventually he'd cut and run. I just didn't know he'd be stupid enough to leave you holding the bill. So you've been following me, watching me." Her voice shook with a mix of violation and disbelief. "And you didn't think to warn me?" "I didn't know which organization would move first, or how they'd play it." His eyes met hers, unflinching. "If I'd approached you without proof, would you have believed me? Or would you have called the police and made yourself an even bigger target?" She wanted to argue, but couldn't. He was right. 3 weeks ago, if a stranger had told her she was in danger from mafia debt collectors, she would have thought he was insane. The car turned onto the highway, picking up speed. The city began to thin, buildings giving way to stretches of darkness punctuated by distant lights. Lavinia leaned her head against the window, the cool glass grounding her. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now you stay alive," Marco said. "And I figure out how to end this without starting a war." She closed her eyes. 20 minutes ago she'd been crying over a breakup. Now she was in the back of a mobster's car, headed toward an estate she'd never seen, protected by a man whose very presence made grown men flee. Her normal life had just ended, and his world of shadows had just begun. The car ride took 40 minutes. Lavinia watched the city disappear behind them until all she could see was darkness and the occasional light from houses set far back from the road. When they finally turned onto a private drive, tall iron gates opened automatically, and Angelo guided the car through. The estate sat on top of a hill. It wasn't showy or covered in gold like she'd expected from a man like Marco. It was stone and glass, clean lines and quiet strength. Lights glowed warm from inside, but the surrounding grounds were dark except for a few security lights placed along the driveway. Angelo stopped the car near the front entrance. Marco got out first, then opened her door and offered his hand. Lavinia took it because her legs felt shaky and she didn't trust herself not to fall. The front door opened before they reached it. A woman in her 50s stood there, gray hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, wearing plain black pants and a white shirt. She looked at Lavinia with kind eyes, the first kindness Lavinia had seen all night. This is Rosa, Marco said. She runs the house. Rosa, this is Lavinia. She'll be staying in the East Wing guest room. Rosa nodded. Of course. I'll prepare it right away. And bring tea to my office, Marco added. The kind that helps with shock. Rosa disappeared down a hallway, her footsteps quiet on the polished stone floors. Marco led Lavinia through the house. She barely registered what she saw. Wide hallways, paintings on walls, furniture that looked comfortable but not fancy. Everything was clean and organized, like a person who didn't tolerate mess lived here. They stopped at a room near the back of the house. Marco pushed open the double doors and gestured for her to enter. His office was big but not cold. A desk sat near one wall, papers stacked neatly on top. Bookshelves lined another wall, filled with actual books that looked read, not just for show. A leather couch faced a fireplace where logs were already burning, filling the room with warmth. Sit, Marco said, pointing to the couch. Lavinia sat. Her hands were still shaking. She pressed them together in her lap to make them stop. Marco walked to his desk and picked up a manila folder. He came back and sat down beside her, not too close, but close enough that she could see the details of his tattoos again. The roses wound around skulls, thorns cutting through bone. Geometric shapes filled the spaces between, all of it done in black and gray ink that looked like it had been put there by an artist who knew exactly what they were doing. Your ex-fiancé's name is Dante Rossi, Marco said, opening the folder. Does that sound familiar? Lavinia blinked. That's not his name. His name is David Ross. That's the name he gave you. His real name is Dante Rossi. He's the nephew of a man named Luca Rossi who used to run shipments for the Moretti family before he got greedy and ended up dead. The words didn't make sense. Lavinia shook her head. No. David works in finance. He's an accountant. Marco pulled out a photograph and handed it to her. It showed her fiancé, or the man she thought was her fiancé, standing next to an older man in front of a warehouse. Both men were smiling. The older man had his arm around David's shoulders like they were family. That's Luca Rossi, Marco said, pointing to the older man. Dante's uncle. The one who taught him how to con people out of their money and property. Lavinia stared at the photo. Her hand started shaking harder. Dante needed a clean property to use as collateral for a loan, Marco continued. He couldn't use anything in his own name because everyone in the underworld knows who he is. So he found you. A woman with a family estate. A woman who trusted easily. A woman who wanted to believe in love. The truth hit her like a punch to the chest. He never loved me. No, he didn't. Tears burned in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. The estate. How much does he owe? €500,000. He borrowed it from 3 different organizations, used your estate as collateral for all 3 loans, and then disappeared. That's impossible. You can't use the same collateral 3 times. You can if the people you're borrowing from don't talk to each other. And if you plan to run before anyone finds out. Marco closed the folder. He's gone, Lavinia. Probably in another country by now with a new name and a new face. But you're still here. And your name is still on that estate deed. Lavinia pressed her hands to her face. Everything she believed about her life, about her relationship, about her future was a lie. Dante had built it all carefully, piece by piece, just to steal from her. Why didn't you tell me this 3 weeks ago? She asked, her voice breaking. Why did you just watch? Because I needed proof, and I needed to know which organization would move first. Marco leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. The men in that hallway tonight work for the Moretti family. They're the smallest of the 3 groups, which means they're the most desperate. The other 2 will come soon. So what happens now? Do I just hide here forever? No. I'm going to fix this. How? Marco was quiet for a moment. Then he rolled up his right sleeve, exposing the full tattoo that covered his arm. The roses were beautiful and deadly. The skulls were detailed, each one slightly different. And woven between them were tiny dates and numbers, so small Lavinia had to lean closer to see them. Each skull represents someone I've killed, Marco said, his voice matter of fact. Each rose represents someone I've saved. The dates are when it happened. Lavinia counted. There were more roses than skulls, but not by much. I don't show people this, Marco continued. But I need you to understand who I am. I've done terrible things to survive in this world. I've hurt people who deserved it, and some who probably didn't. But I've also protected people who had no one else. He looked at her, his gray-blue eyes steady. You're one of the Roses now, Lavinia. Which means I'll do whatever it takes to keep you alive. She didn't know what to say. This man, this dangerous stranger, had just made her a promise written in ink and blood. Rosa appeared in the doorway with a tray. She set it down on the small table near the couch. 2 cups of tea and a plate of plain biscuits. The tea smelled like chamomile and honey. Drink, Marco said gently. It'll help. Lavinia picked up one of the cups with shaking hands. The warmth helped, even if the fear didn't go away. I'm going to make some calls, Marco said, standing. Rosa will show you to your room when you're ready. Get some sleep if you can. Tomorrow we start fixing this mess. He walked to the door, then paused and looked back at her. You're safe here, Lavinia. I promise you that. Then he was gone. Lavinia sat alone in the office, holding her tea, staring at the fire. Everything she'd known was gone. Her fiancé was a con artist. Her home was collateral for a debt she didn't know. And the only person standing between her and death was a man with roses and skulls tattooed on his skin. She touched the cup to her lips and drank. The tea was sweet and warm, and for just a moment, it made her feel like maybe, just maybe, she could survive this. Rosa returned 20 minutes later and found Lavinia still sitting on the couch, staring at nothing. The fire had burned lower. The tea had gone cold in her hands. Come, Rosa said softly. Let me show you to your room. Lavinia followed her through hallways that all looked the same. Left turn, right turn, past doors that stayed closed. She tried to memorize the route, but gave up after the 3rd turn. If she needed to run, she'd be lost in seconds. The guest room was at the end of a quiet hallway in what Marco had called the East Wing. Rosa opened the door and stepped inside, turning on a lamp that filled the space with soft yellow light. The room was simple. A bed with white sheets and a thick gray blanket. A nightstand with another lamp. A dresser against one wall. A door that led to a private bathroom. No bars on the windows, but Lavinia knew that didn't mean she could leave. Your things will arrive tomorrow, Rosa said. For tonight, there are clean clothes in the dresser. Towels in the bathroom. If you need anything, press the button by the bed and I'll come. Lavinia looked at the button mounted on the wall near the headboard. It looked like something from a hotel. Thank you, she said, because she didn't know what else to say. Rosa studied her for a moment with those kind eyes. You've had a terrible night. Try to rest. Things always look less frightening in the morning. She left, closing the door quietly behind her. Lavinia stood in the middle of the room, alone for the first time since the corridor. The silence pressed against her ears. She walked to the window and looked out. The grounds were dark except for scattered lights along paths she couldn't see clearly. Trees formed black shapes against the night sky. She couldn't see the gate from here. Couldn't see the road. Couldn't see anything that told her where she was, or how far she'd come from the city. She was trapped. Not in a cell with bars, but in a beautiful room with soft sheets, and a kind housekeeper, and a man who'd promised to protect her with roses and skulls tattooed on his skin. Lavinia pressed her forehead against the cool glass. The tears she'd been holding back finally came. They were quiet tears, the kind that hurt your chest and made your throat tight. She cried for the life she'd lost, for the man she'd loved who never existed, for the stupid hope she'd carried that maybe, just maybe, someone could love her the way she deserved. She cried until there was nothing left. Then she pushed away from the window, wiped her face with her hands, and went to the bathroom. The light was bright and honest. Her reflection looked like a stranger. Makeup smeared under her eyes. Hair messy from running her hands through it. The green dress she'd worn to the party felt wrong now, like a costume from someone else's life. She found the clothes Rosa had mentioned. Soft cotton pants and a plain white shirt, both too big but clean. She changed, washed her face, and brushed her teeth with the toothbrush still in its package on the sink. Small kindnesses that Rosa had thought to prepare. When she came back to the bedroom, she noticed something she'd missed before. A glass of water on the nightstand. A small plate with plain crackers. Rosa must have brought them while Lavinia was in the bathroom. She wasn't hungry, but she ate one cracker anyway. It tasted like nothing. She drank half the water and sat on the edge of the bed. The sheets were soft. The mattress was comfortable. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw those men in the corridor reaching for her, heard Marco's voice cutting through the darkness, felt the car moving, taking her further from everything she knew. She lay down anyway, pulled the blanket up to her chin, stared at the ceiling. Sleep wouldn't come. How could it? Her mind kept spinning through everything Marco had told her. Dante Rossi, €500,000, 3 different organizations, the estate she'd inherited from her grandmother, the one place she'd always felt safe, now a death sentence with her name on it. A soft knock on the door made her sit up. "Lavinia!" Marco's voice, quiet through the wood. "Are you awake?" She almost didn't answer, almost pretended to be asleep, but something in his tone made her say, yes. The door opened slowly. Marco stood in the doorway, still wearing the same black suit but with his jacket gone and his sleeves rolled up. He carried another cup of tea. "Rosa said you didn't drink the first one," he said. "I made this one myself. It's stronger. It'll help you sleep." He crossed the room and set the cup on the nightstand, then stepped back like he didn't want to crowd her. Lavinia sat up against the headboard. "I don't think anything will help me sleep tonight. I know the feeling." Marco stayed standing, his hands in his pockets. "I've had a lot of nights like this, when your brain won't shut off and every shadow looks like a threat." "How do you do it?" she asked. "Live like this all the time? You get used to it. The fear becomes normal. Then you find things worth protecting, and the fear changes into something else. Purpose, maybe." Lavinia picked up the tea. It smelled different from the first cup, stronger, like he'd said. She took a sip. It was bitter and sweet at the same time. Marco walked to the window and looked out at the same darkness she'd been staring at earlier. "I meant what I said. You're safe here. The walls are reinforced. The security system is better than most government buildings. My men patrol the grounds every hour. No one gets in unless I say so. So I'm in a very nice prison. You're in a sanctuary." He turned to look at her. "There's a difference." "Is there?" She set the cup down harder than she meant to. "I can't leave. I can't go home. I can't call anyone. I don't even know if I can walk outside without someone watching me." "You can walk outside whenever you want. There's a garden on the south side. Rosa tends it herself. You can go there, sit there, spend all day there if it helps." His voice stayed calm. "But you're right about one thing. Someone will always be watching. Because the second you're unprotected, you're dead." The bluntness of it hit her hard. She pulled her knees up to her chest. Marco moved closer, but only a few steps. "I know this isn't the life you wanted. I know you're angry and scared and you don't trust me. You shouldn't trust me. I'm not a good man, Lavinia. But I'm the only thing standing between you and people who will hurt you in ways I won't describe." "Why?" she whispered. "Why does it matter to you if I live or die?" He was quiet for a long moment. The lamp cast shadows across his face, making him look older, tired. "Because you remind me of someone," he said finally. "Someone I couldn't save, and I've carried that with me for 8 years. He touched his left wrist where another small tattoo sat. This one just a single rose with no date. So maybe I'm being selfish. Maybe saving you is really about saving myself." Lavinia didn't know what to say to that. Marco moved toward the door. "Drink the tea. Sleep if you can. Tomorrow we'll talk about what comes next." "Marco!" He stopped, his hand on the doorframe. "Thank you," she said, "for the tea. And for being honest." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but close. "Good night, Lavinia." The door closed softly. Lavinia picked up the tea and drank it slowly. It was strong and bitter and made her feel warm from the inside out. By the time she finished, her eyelids felt heavy. She lay back down, pulled the blanket up, and for the first time since the corridor, she felt something other than fear. She felt safe, just for tonight, in this beautiful cage, with a dangerous man standing guard. She let herself believe she might actually survive this. And then, finally, she slept. Lavinia woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of coffee. For 3 beautiful seconds, she forgot where she was. Then reality crashed back. The estate, Marco, the debt, Dante's betrayal. She sat up and found a tray on the nightstand. Coffee, toast with butter, fresh fruit cut into small pieces. A note in neat handwriting said, "Eat. You'll need your strength. Rosa." Lavinia ate because her body demanded it, even though her mind was still spinning. The coffee was strong and good. The toast settled her stomach. By the time she finished, she felt almost human again. Someone had left her bags by the door. Her clothes, her laptop, her toiletries, all packed carefully like Rosa had promised. She showered and changed into jeans and a simple sweater, then braided her hair to keep it out of her face. When she looked in the mirror, she saw someone who could maybe handle what came next. She found her way back through the hallways, this time paying attention to the details. Family photos in simple frames. Plants on small tables. Everything clean but lived in. This wasn't just Marco's fortress. It was his home. Voices led her to the kitchen. Rosa stood at the stove, stirring something in a pot. Angelo sat at a wooden table, reading a newspaper and drinking espresso from a tiny cup. They both looked up when she entered. "Good morning," Rosa said warmly. "Did you sleep?" "Better than I expected," Lavinia admitted. Angelo folded his newspaper. "Marco's in his office. He asked to see you when you woke up." Lavinia's stomach tightened. "Is something wrong?" Angelo and Rosa exchanged a look that said yes, but Angelo just stood and said, "Follow me." They walked through the house to the same office from last night. Angelo knocked twice, then opened the door. Marco stood by his desk, phone pressed to his ear. He looked tired, like he hadn't slept at all. When he saw Lavinia, he ended the call without saying goodbye. "Close the door," he told Angelo. Angelo did, leaving Lavinia alone with Marco. "Sit," Marco said, but it wasn't a command. It was a request. Lavinia sat on the same couch as before. Marco came around his desk and leaned against it, arms crossed. The morning light caught the details of his tattoos. The roses looked softer in daylight. The skulls looked harder. "The Moretti family sent a message last night," he said. "They know you're here." The words hit like cold water. "How?" "Someone saw us leave the building. Or someone who works for me talked. It doesn't matter how. What matters is they know, and they're not happy about it." Lavinia's hands clenched in her lap. "What kind of message?" Marco pulled out his phone and showed her a photo. It was the front gate of his estate, the same gate she'd driven through last night. Someone had spray-painted words across it in red. "500,000 or the girl. Your choice, Butcho." Her breath caught in her throat. "They can't get in," Marco said, putting the phone away. "The gate is the furthest they'll ever get, but they're making it clear they're not backing down." "Why don't you just give me to them?" Lavinia asked, her voice shaking. "If it's me or a war with them, wouldn't it be easier to just hand me over?" Marco's expression hardened. "Do you know what they'd do to you?" She shook her head. "They'd take you to a location no one could find. They'd make you sign over the estate. Then they'd keep you there until the other two organizations came looking for their money. They'd use you as bait, trade you back and forth until someone got bored. And when you were no longer useful..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Lavinia felt sick. "So no," Marco said firmly. "I'm not handing you over. Not now. Not ever." "Then what do we do?" "We wait. I've already made calls. Put the word out that you're under my protection. The Moretti family is small, desperate. They'll push harder before they pull back. But the other two organizations, the Volkov crew and the DeLuca network, they're bigger, smarter. They'll wait to see how this plays out. So I just sit here while they decide whether to kill me. You sit here while I negotiate. While I find Dante and make him fix what he broke. While I figure out how to clear your name without starting a war that gets innocent people killed." Marco's voice softened. "I know it's not fair. I know you're scared. But this is the only way to keep you alive." Lavinia wanted to scream. Wanted to run. Wanted to go back to 2 days ago when her biggest problem was planning a wedding that would never happen. Instead, she asked, "How long will this take?" "I don't know. Days. Weeks. Depends on how fast I can find Dante and how willing the families are to listen." "And if they're not willing to listen?" Marco's jaw tightened. "Then I make them listen." A knock on the door interrupted them. Angelo stepped in, his face serious. "Boss, we have a problem." Marco straightened. "What kind of problem?" "The south gate. Someone cut through the fence during the night. They didn't get far. The motion sensors picked them up and scared them off, but they left something." "Show me." Angelo pulled out his phone and showed Marco a photo. Lavinia couldn't see it from where she sat, but she saw Marco's expression go cold and dangerous. "Where is it now?" Marco asked. "Secured in the equipment shed. I didn't want to bring it in the house." Marco nodded. "Good. Burn it. Then double the patrols and fix that fence. I want cameras on every inch of the property line by tonight." "Already in progress." Angelo left. Marco stood still for a moment, his hand rubbing the back of his neck like he was carrying weight too heavy to hold. "What did they leave?" Lavinia asked quietly. Marco looked at her, hesitated, then said, "A dead rose wrapped in barbed wire. It's a message. They're saying I can't protect you." The air felt too thin. Lavinia's chest tightened. "But they're wrong," Marco said, his voice hard as steel. "They got through one fence. That won't happen again. I'll tear down every organization in the city before I let them touch you." He meant it. She could see it in his eyes, in the set of his shoulders, in the way his hands curled into fists. "Why?" she asked for the second time in as many days. "Why are you doing this for me?" Marco crossed the room and crouched down in front of her so they were eye level. Up close, she could see the flecks of blue in his gray eyes, could see the scar that cut through his left eyebrow, could see the exhaustion that lived beneath the dangerous exterior. "Because 8 years ago, I made a choice to protect my business instead of protecting someone I cared about," he said quietly. "And she died because of it. I've lived with that every day since. So when I say I'll protect you, Lavinia, I mean it with everything I have. Because I can't save her. But I can save you." Lavinia's throat tightened. She saw the pain in his eyes, old and deep and permanent. "Who was she?" she whispered. "Her name was Sophia. She was my sister." The single rose on his wrist, the one with no date, it wasn't for someone he'd killed or saved. It was for someone he'd lost. Before Lavinia could respond, Marco stood and stepped back, the vulnerable moment closing like a door. "Stay in the house today," he said, his voice back to business. "Rosa will stay with you. I need to make calls and shore up our defenses. Tonight, we'll talk about what comes next." He walked to his desk, already pulling out his phone. Lavinia stood slowly. "Marco!" He looked up. "Thank you for telling me about Sophia." Something flickered in his expression. Not quite gratitude, but close. "Go," he said gently. "Rosa made soup. You should eat." Lavinia left the office and found Rosa waiting in the hallway like she'd known Lavinia would need her. "Come," Rosa said. "Let's get you fed." As they walked toward the kitchen, Lavinia glanced back once. Through the open office door, she saw Marco standing by the window, phone to his ear, shoulders tense. A man trying to protect her from the same darkness that had taken his sister. And for the first time, Lavinia realized the walls around this estate weren't just to keep danger out. They were to keep Marco's guilt in. 3 days passed in a strange kind of stillness. Lavinia spent her mornings in the garden Rosa had mentioned, a quiet space on the south side of the house where vegetables grew in neat rows and flowers bloomed along stone paths. She spent her afternoons reading books from Marco's office, old novels with worn spines that had clearly been read many times. She spent her evenings eating dinner with Rosa and Angelo while Marco made phone calls behind closed doors. It was peaceful, safe, boring, and Lavinia hated feeling useless. On the 4th morning, she found Marco in the garden. He wore dark pants and a plain black shirt, sleeves rolled up, sitting on a stone bench near the tomato plants. He was reading something on his phone, his expression focused. "Can I talk to you?" Lavinia asked. He looked up. "Of course." She sat down on the opposite end of the bench, leaving space between them. "I can't just sit here anymore. I need to do something." "You're staying alive. That's something." "That's not what I mean." She turned to face him. "You're out there negotiating with criminals, trying to fix a mess I didn't even make. And I'm just sitting in a garden reading books. I feel like a child waiting for the adults to solve everything." Marco studied her for a moment. "What do you want to do?" "I don't know. Learn something. Help somehow. Anything that makes me feel less like a victim." He was quiet, thinking. Then he stood. "Come with me." He led her to a building she hadn't been in before, a converted garage that had been turned into something between a gym and a training space. Mats covered half the floor. Weights lined one wall. A punching bag hung in the corner. "I'm not going to teach you to fight," Marco said. If it comes down to fighting, you've already lost. What I'm going to teach you is how to see." Lavinia frowned. "See what?" "Everything. Most people go through life half asleep. They don't notice who's watching them. Don't see the exits in a room. Don't recognize when something feels wrong." He walked to the center of the mats. "In my world, the people who survive are the ones who pay attention." He gestured for her to join him. "Close your eyes," he said. She did. "Now tell me what color shirt Angelo was wearing at breakfast." Lavinia tried to remember. She'd sat across from Angelo, talked to him about the weather. But his shirt? Blue, maybe. Green. Try again. What was Rosa wearing? "I don't remember." "Exactly. You were there, but you weren't seeing." Marco's voice was patient, not judging. "Open your eyes." She did. He was standing closer now, just a few feet away. People miss things because they're distracted by their own thoughts. They worry about what they'll say next, or what happened yesterday. Meanwhile, someone dangerous walks right past them and they never notice. He crossed his arms. "I need you to notice. Because if someone comes for you when I'm not there, your best weapon is awareness." For the next hour, Marco put her through exercises that had nothing to do with punching or kicking. He made her walk through the building and describe every detail when she came back. Made her listen to sounds outside and identify what caused them. Made her watch him move around the room and count how many times he touched his phone. It was harder than it sounded. Her mind wanted to wander. Wanted to think about Dante, or the debt, or what would happen next. But every time she lost focus, Marco would snap his fingers and bring her back. "Again," he'd say. "Pay attention." By the end of the hour, Lavinia's head hurt from concentrating so hard. But she also felt different. More awake. More present. "Better," Marco said. "Tomorrow we'll do it again. Every day until it becomes automatic." "Why are you doing this?" Lavinia asked, wiping sweat from her forehead, even though she hadn't done anything physical. "Teaching me, I mean." Marco picked up a water bottle and handed it to her. "Because knowledge is power, and right now, you need every bit of power you can get." She drank, grateful for the cold water. "Is this what you do? Train people to survive?" "I train my people to protect what's mine. But I've never trained someone to protect themselves." He paused. "It's different." "How?" "Because my people chose this life. You didn't. You got dragged into it by someone who didn't care what happened to you." His jaw tightened. "That makes me want to give you tools, not just shields." Something in his voice made Lavinia's chest warm. She set down the water bottle. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. This is just the beginning." They trained every morning after that. Marco would find her after breakfast and lead her to the training building. Some days he taught her about body language, how to read whether someone was nervous or lying or planning violence. Other days he taught her about escape routes, how to map a room in seconds and find the fastest way out. He never touched her during training except to adjust her posture or guide her attention to something she'd missed. But Lavinia found herself noticing him more. The way he moved with complete control. The way his voice stayed calm, even when correcting her. The way he smelled like cedar and something darker she couldn't name. She noticed other things, too. The scar through his eyebrow that she wanted to ask about but didn't. The way he rolled his shoulders when he was tired. The rare smile that appeared when she got something right, transforming his whole face for just a second. On the 7th day, they were practicing observation again. Marco had her study his face for 30 seconds, then close her eyes and describe what she'd seen. "Your eyes are gray with blue around the edges," she said, eyes still closed. "You have a scar through your left eyebrow, another small one on your chin. Your beard is trimmed close. You have 3 freckles on your right cheek, barely visible. And you're tired. I can tell because your eyes are a little red and you keep blinking like they're dry." When she opened her eyes, Marco was staring at her with an expression she couldn't read. "What?" she asked. "No one's ever noticed the freckles before. They're faint, but they're there." Something shifted in the air between them. The space felt smaller suddenly, charged with something Lavinia didn't have a name for. She was aware of every detail about him now. The rise and fall of his chest, the way his hands hung loose at his sides, the intensity in his eyes that wasn't anger or calculation but something warmer. "You're getting good at this," Marco said, his voice quieter than usual. "You're a good teacher." They stood there, 3 feet apart, the morning sun streaming through the high windows. Lavinia's heart beat faster. She didn't know if it was from the training or from the way Marco was looking at her, like he was seeing her for the first time. "We should stop for today," Marco said, but he didn't move. Neither did Lavinia. "Marco," she said softly, "I'm starting to feel less afraid. Of all of this. Of them. Maybe even of you." His expression softened. "You should still be a little afraid of me." "Why?" "Because I'm not good for you, Lavinia. I'm the person who lives in the shadows. You deserve sunshine. Maybe I'm tired of sunshine. Maybe it just showed me how blind I'd been." Marco took a step closer, then stopped himself like he'd hit an invisible wall. "You're here because I'm protecting you, not because of anything else. I know that. And when this is over, you'll go back to your life. A real life. Not this. What if I don't want to?" The question hung in the air between them. Marco's hands curled into fists, then relaxed. He looked like he was fighting himself. "You don't know what you're saying," he said finally. "Don't I?" Lavinia stepped closer, closing the distance he'd created. "I notice things now, remember? You taught me that. And I notice the way you look at me when you think I'm not paying attention. I notice how you always make sure I eat. How you check the locks on my windows every night, even though you have guards doing the same thing. I notice you, Marco." His jaw clenched. For a long moment, he didn't speak. Then he said, quietly, almost painfully, "This can't happen." "Why not?" "Because I've already failed one person I cared about. I won't do that again." "You're not failing me. You're teaching me to survive. That's not enough." He stepped back, creating distance again. "Training is over for today. I need to make some calls." He walked toward the door, and Lavinia felt something crack in her chest. Not heartbreak. Something different. The recognition that he was running from her, because he was just as scared as she was. "Marco," she called after him. He stopped at the door but didn't turn around. "One day you're going to realize you deserve sunshine too." He stood there for 3 long seconds. Then he left without responding. Lavinia stood alone in the training room, breathing hard, her heart racing. Everything had changed. The fear between them had shifted into something else. Something magnetic and terrifying and inevitable. And both of them knew it. For 2 days after that moment in the training room, Marco avoided her. He stopped coming to breakfast, stopped teaching her, left early in the morning, and came back late at night when Lavinia was already in her room. She heard his footsteps in the hallway sometimes, slow and heavy, like he was carrying weight that got heavier with each step. Rosa noticed but said nothing. Angelo pretended everything was normal. And Lavinia tried not to care, but she did. She cared too much. On the 3rd night, she couldn't take it anymore. She found him in his office at midnight. The door was half open, light spilling into the dark hallway. Marco sat at his desk, a glass of whiskey in one hand, papers spread out in front of him. He looked exhausted, defeated in a way she'd never seen before. Lavinia knocked softly on the doorframe. Marco looked up, surprise flashing across his face. "You should be sleeping." "So should you." She stepped inside without waiting for permission. "But here we are." He set down his glass. "Lavinia, I can't do this right now." "Do what?" "Talk to me. Look at me." She closed the door behind her. "You've been avoiding me for 3 days. I think I deserve to know why." "You know why? Because I told you I notice you? Because something is happening between us, and you're too scared to deal with it?" Marco's jaw tightened. "I'm not scared. I'm being smart. There's a difference." "Is there?" Lavinia walked closer to his desk. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks a lot like fear." He stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. "You have no idea what you're talking about." "Then explain it to me. Stop running and just talk to me." Marco stared at her for a long moment. Then he turned away and walked to the window, looking out at the dark grounds. "You want to know why I'm avoiding you? Fine. I'll tell you. Because every time I look at you, I forget what I am. I forget that I've killed people, that I've hurt people, that my hands are so covered in blood that no amount of washing will ever make them clean." His voice was raw, broken in a way that made Lavinia's chest hurt. "I'm not a good man, Lavinia. I run an empire built on fear and violence. I make decisions that ruin lives. I've done things that would make you sick if you knew the details. He turned to look at her. And you stand there looking at me like I'm someone worth saving. Like I'm more than what I am. Maybe you are, Lavinia said quietly. I'm not. Marco's hands curled into fists. Sophia thought I was too. She thought there was good in me worth protecting. And she died because I chose this life over her safety. I told myself the business mattered more. That I could keep her safe while still being who I was. I was wrong. What happened to her? Marco was silent for so long Lavinia thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, his voice barely above a whisper, a rival family wanted to send me a message. They knew the easiest way to hurt me was through her. I had warnings. I knew they were planning something. But I thought my walls were high enough. My guards were good enough. I thought I could protect her without changing anything about my life. He paused, his hands gripping the edge of the window frame like it was the only thing keeping him upright. They took her from a cafe 3 blocks from her university. Broad daylight. Cameras everywhere. And no one stopped them because everyone knew who I was, and they were too afraid to get involved. By the time I found her, it was too late. Lavinia felt tears burn in her eyes. Marco, I'm so sorry. Don't be sorry. Be smart. Be smart enough to see that caring about me is a death sentence. It was for Sophia. It will be for you too if you're not careful. That's not fair. You can't compare what happened to your sister to what's happening now. The situations are completely different. Are they? Marco turned to face her fully. You're here because someone used you as collateral. Someone saw you as expendable. And now you're under my protection, which makes you a target for everyone who wants to hurt me. How is that different? Because I know what I'm getting into now. Sophia didn't. I'm not naive anymore, Marco. You made sure of that. You taught me to see, remember? Lavinia stepped closer. I see you. The real you. Not just the dangerous parts, but everything else too. The way you check on Rosa when she's tired. The way you read the same books over and over because they comfort you. The way you make terrible tea, but bring it to me anyway because you want me to sleep. Marco's expression cracked just slightly. I see a man who's carrying guilt that isn't entirely his fault, Lavinia continued. A man who's convinced himself he doesn't deserve anything good because good things have been taken from him before. A man who's built walls so high he's trapped himself inside them. Stop, Marco said, but there was no force behind it. Why? Because it's true. Lavinia was close enough now to see the pain in his eyes. You told me once that you wanted to leave this life behind. Do you remember that? I say a lot of things. You meant it. I could tell. She took a breath. So why don't you? Because I can't. Not while you're still in danger. Not while there are 3 organizations out there who think you owe them money. Not while leaving would create a power gap that would get innocent people killed. His voice dropped. And not while you're here making me want things I have no right to want. The admission hung in the air between them. What do you want? Lavinia asked softly. Marco's eyes met hers. For once, he didn't look away. I want to wake up in a place where no one knows my name. I want to drink coffee without checking over my shoulder. I want to read books in the afternoon without my phone ringing every 5 minutes with problems that need blood to solve. I want... He stopped, his voice catching. I want to be the kind of man you could build a life with. Not this. Not what I am now. Lavinia's heart hammered in her chest. Then be that man. It's not that simple. It could be, if you wanted it enough. And what about you? Marco asked. What do you want? Lavinia thought about it. A week ago, she would have said she wanted her old life back. Her apartment, her routines, her safe and predictable existence. But now she wasn't sure that life had ever really been hers to begin with. I want to stop feeling like I'm waiting for someone else to decide my fate, she said finally. I want to be strong enough that I don't need protecting, even though I know that's probably impossible. And I want... She hesitated. I want to know what happens if we stop pretending this isn't happening between us. Marco closed his eyes like her words caused him physical pain. Lavinia, I know it's complicated. I know there are 100 reasons why this is a terrible idea. But I also know that life is short and unpredictable, and the things we regret most are the chances we don't take. She reached out and touched his arm, feeling the tension in his muscles. You've already lost so much, Marco. Don't lose this too, because you're afraid. He opened his eyes and looked down at her hand on his arm. Then, slowly, he covered her hand with his own. His palm was warm and rough with calluses. "If I do this," he said quietly, "if I let myself feel what I'm feeling, I need you to understand something. I will burn down every organization in this city before I let them touch you. I will start wars. I will make enemies. I will do things that will make you question who I am. Because protecting you isn't just strategy anymore. It's personal. I understand. Do you? Because there's no going back from this. Once I claim you as mine, really mine, not just as my protection but as something more, the rules change. Everything changes." Lavinia looked up at him, at this dangerous, broken, beautiful man who'd saved her life and taught her to save herself. "Maybe I want everything to change." Marco stared at her for a long moment. Then he lifted his free hand and touched her face, his thumb brushing across her cheek with a gentleness that contradicted everything he was. "You're going to be the death of me," he whispered. "Or maybe I'll be the life of you." He almost smiled. "Almost. When this is over, when you're safe, I'm leaving this world behind. I'm taking whatever money I've saved and disappearing to some quiet place where no one knows what I've done. And I'm going to try to be the man I should have been all along. Can I come with you?" Lavinia asked, Marco's hand stilled on her face. "You'd want that? After everything?" "I'd want that. If you'd have me." He pulled her closer, wrapping his arms around her like he was afraid she'd disappear. Lavinia pressed her face against his chest, hearing his heart beat fast and hard. "I'd have you," Marco said into her hair. "In any life, in any version of myself, I'd have you." They stood there in his office, holding each other while the clock ticked and the night stretched on. Two broken people finding something whole in the ruins of their separate lives. When they finally pulled apart, Marco looked different. Lighter somehow, like he'd set down weight he'd been carrying for years. "Tomorrow we start planning our exit," he said. "I'm going to end this debt situation one way or another. And then we're both getting out." "Together," Lavinia said. "Together," Marco agreed. He walked her to her room, his hand warm in hers. At her door, he kissed her forehead, soft and sweet and full of promise. "Sleep well, Lavinia. You too." She went inside and leaned against the closed door, her heart full of something she thought she'd never feel again. Hope. The next morning felt different. Lighter. Lavinia woke to sunlight and the smell of fresh bread from the kitchen. She dressed quickly and went downstairs, expecting to find Marco at breakfast like he'd promised. But only Rosa was there, kneading dough at the counter. "Good morning," Rosa said warmly. "Did you sleep well?" "Better than I have in weeks." Lavinia poured herself coffee. "Where's Marco?" Rosa's smile dimmed slightly. "He had to leave early. Something urgent came up with one of the families. He said he'd be back by tonight." Lavinia's stomach tightened. "What kind of urgent?" "He didn't say. But Angela went with him, and half the security team too." Rosa shaped the dough into a loaf. "Don't worry. There are still plenty of guards here. You're safe." But Lavinia felt the absence like a cold space where warmth should have been. Marco had promised they'd start planning today. Had promised they'd figure this out together. Now he was gone, dealing with the same violent world he'd said he wanted to leave behind. She spent the morning in the garden, trying to distract herself with the tomato plants that needed weeding. The sun was warm. Birds sang in the trees beyond the wall. Everything looked peaceful. Too peaceful. By noon, Lavinia's unease had grown into something she couldn't ignore. The estate felt wrong. Too quiet. She went back inside to find Rosa, but the kitchen was empty. The bread sat cooling on the counter, but Rosa was nowhere. "Rosa!" Lavinia called. No answer. She walked through the first floor, checking rooms. The living area was empty. Marco's office was locked. The dining room showed no signs of life. Lavinia's training kicked in. She stopped moving and listened. Really listened. The house was silent, but it was the wrong kind of silent. No footsteps from guards making their rounds. No distant voices from the security room. Nothing. Her heart started racing. She went to the front entrance and looked out the window. The driveway was empty except for one black car she didn't recognize. No guards visible anywhere. Something was very wrong. Lavinia turned to go back upstairs, to lock herself in her room and call Marco, but a sound stopped her. Footsteps, multiple sets, coming from the service hallway that led to the back of the house. The same hallway where Marco had first found her in that corridor. She backed away slowly, trying to stay quiet, but the footsteps got closer, faster. 3 men emerged from the hallway, the same 2 from the building corridor that first night, plus a third she'd never seen. All wearing dark coats, all looking at her like she was a package they'd come to collect. Lavinia Duca, the tall one said, the one who'd smiled at her that night in the city. We've been waiting for this. Lavinia ran. She made it to the stairs before hands grabbed her from behind. She screamed, loud and sharp, the way Marco had taught her. Make noise. Draw attention. Never go quietly. But no one came. The men dragged her back down the stairs. She fought, kicking and twisting, but there were 3 of them and they were strong. Professional. They'd done this before. Stop fighting, one of them growled. You're only making this harder. Where's Rosa? Lavinia demanded, her voice shaking. What did you do to her? The old woman's fine. Locked in the pantry. She'll be found eventually. They pulled her toward the service hallway. Lavinia grabbed at door frames, at furniture, at anything she could reach. Her fingers scraped against wood and came away bloody, but she didn't care. Marco will kill you for this, she said through gritted teeth. The tall one laughed. Marco's not here. That's the whole point. They dragged her down the hallway, past the kitchen, toward the back door that led to the service entrance. The same route she'd taken with Marco that first night, except now she was going the opposite direction. Back toward danger instead of away from it. How did you get past the guards? Lavinia asked, still fighting even though she knew it was useless. Your boyfriend's not the only one with people on the inside, the third man said. One of his guards has been on our payroll for weeks. He made sure everyone was looking the wrong way when we came in. A traitor. Someone Marco trusted had sold them out. They reached the back door. A van waited outside, engine running. The door slid open, revealing darkness inside. Lavinia's training screamed at her. Don't get in the vehicle. Once you're in, you're gone. Fight now. Fight with everything. She threw her weight backward, slamming her head into the nose of the man holding her left arm. He swore and loosened his grip. She twisted free and ran, not toward the house but toward the trees that lined the property. She made it 10 feet before something hit her hard from behind, knocking her to the ground. Her chin cracked against the pavement. Stars burst in her vision. Enough, the tall one said, hauling her up by her hair. We were told to bring you in one piece, but nobody said anything about comfortable. They threw her into the van. She landed hard on the metal floor, her shoulder taking the impact. Before she could move, someone zip-tied her wrists behind her back. Then her ankles. She was trapped. The door slammed shut, cutting off the daylight. The van started moving. Lavinia lay on the cold floor, breathing hard, tasting blood from where she'd bitten her tongue. Her training had failed. Her strength had failed. Everything Marco had taught her hadn't been enough. She was alone. Where are you taking me? She asked the darkness. The tall one sat near the back doors, visible in the dim light from the front cab. Moretti Warehouse on the docks. The boss wants to have a conversation with you about your property. I don't have any property. The estate isn't mine anymore. Dante used it. I never agreed to any of this. Tell it to Moretti. Maybe he'll believe you. Maybe he won't. Either way, you're his problem now. The van turned sharply, throwing Lavinia against the wall. Pain shot through her shoulder. She bit back a cry. Think, she told herself. Marco taught you to think. What would he do? But Marco wasn't here. He was somewhere across the city, dealing with business, completely unaware that his home had been breached, that the woman he'd promised to protect had been taken from the same kind of corridor where he'd first found her. The irony was cruel. Lavinia closed her eyes and tried to steady her breathing. Panic wouldn't help. She needed to stay calm. Stay aware. Remember everything Marco had taught her about observation and survival. She studied the van from her position on the floor. 2 men up front, the tall one in back with her. Windows tinted dark. No handles on the inside of the doors. Standard kidnapping vehicle. She counted turns, listened to sounds outside. Traffic noise, which meant they were still in the city. A train whistle in the distance. the smell of salt water growing stronger. The docks. Just like the man had said. The van slowed, then stopped. Doors opened. Hands grabbed her again, dragging her out into gray daylight. They were in an industrial area, warehouses stretching in every direction. The smell of fish and diesel filled the air. They carried her into a building with rusted walls and broken windows. Inside, the space was mostly empty except for old crates and chains hanging from the ceiling. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness. They dropped her on a metal chair and cut the zip tie on her ankles, but left her wrists bound behind her back. Someone wrapped a chain around her waist and the chair, securing her in place. "Comfortable?" the tall one asked, smirking. Lavinia didn't answer. She was busy memorizing the layout. 3 exits she could see. 4 windows, all high up. The chain was thick, but the chair was old. If she could tip it over, maybe break it, maybe get free. A door opened at the far end of the warehouse. A man walked in, flanked by 2 more guards. He was older, maybe 60, with gray hair and a face that had seen too much violence to ever look kind again. "Lavinia Duca," he said, his voice rough like gravel. "I'm Vincent Moretti, and you and I need to have a very serious conversation about money you owe me." He pulled up another chair and sat down facing her, close enough that she could smell cigarette smoke on his clothes. "I don't owe you anything," Lavinia said, keeping her voice steady. "Dante Rossi used my estate without my knowledge. I never signed anything. I never agreed to be collateral." Moretti smiled, but it was the kind of smile that made her skin crawl. "That's not how this works, sweetheart. Your name is on the deed. That makes you responsible. And I want my €500,000. I don't have €500,000. Then I guess we have a problem." He leaned back. "But here's the good news. I'm a reasonable man. I don't want to hurt you. I just want what I'm owed. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to sign over the estate to me. Then you're going to call the other 2 organizations and tell them the same thing. Once the property is mine, I'll sell it, take what I'm owed, and we'll call this settled. And if I refuse..." Moretti's smile vanished. "Then I stop being reasonable." Lavinia thought about Marco, about the promise they'd made last night, about the future they'd planned, the quiet life far from this violence. She thought about the rose tattoo on Marco's wrist, the one for Sophia, the sister he couldn't save. She wouldn't let him carry another rose with no date. "I'll sign," she lied, "but I need proof that you'll let me go after." Moretti studied her. "Smart girl. I'll have papers drawn up. Until then, you wait here. Make yourself comfortable." He stood and walked toward the door, his guards following. "One more thing," he called back. "Your boyfriend Marco? He's not coming for you. My inside man made sure he got a tip about trouble on the east side. He'll be chasing shadows for hours. By the time he figures out what happened, you'll be long gone." The door slammed shut. Lavinia was alone in the warehouse, chained to a chair with no way to call for help. But she wasn't helpless. Marco had taught her to see, to think, to survive, and she would use every single lesson to get out of this alive. Lavinia tested the chain around her waist. It was tight but not impossible. The chair beneath her was old, the wood cracked in places. If she could rock hard enough, maybe she could break the legs and slip free. She started slowly, shifting her weight side to side. The chair creaked. The chain rattled. But no one came to check on her. The warehouse stayed silent except for the drip of water somewhere in the darkness. She was alone. For now. Lavinia counted seconds in her head, timing the movements. Rock left, pause, rock right, pause. Building momentum. The chair started to wobble. One of the back legs felt looser than the others. She kept going, ignoring the way the metal bit into her wrists, ignoring the pain in her shoulder from being thrown in the van. Marco had taught her to push through discomfort, to stay focused on the goal. Get free. Find an exit. Survive. The chair leg cracked. Not broken yet, but weakening. Lavinia pushed harder, throwing her weight to the left with everything she had. The leg snapped. The chair tipped sideways, slamming her against the concrete floor. Pain exploded through her side, but she didn't stop. She twisted, pulling her bound wrists against the broken chair piece until the wood splintered further. The chain loosened. Lavinia worked her way out of it, her heart pounding. She was still zip-tied, but she was free of the chair. She got to her knees, then to her feet, moving toward the nearest window. That's when she heard it. Outside the warehouse. Engines. Multiple vehicles arriving fast. Then gunfire. The sound was sharp and close, echoing off metal walls. Men shouting. More shots. The warehouse door burst open, and one of Moretti's guards stumbled in, blood spreading across his shoulder. "They're here!" he yelled. "Get the girl and move!" But before anyone could reach Lavinia, the main door exploded inward. Not opened. Exploded. The metal twisted and flew across the warehouse as something hit it with enough force to tear it from its hinges. Through the smoke and dust, Marco walked in. He wasn't alone. Angelo was on his right, weapon drawn. For more men Lavinia recognized from the estate fanned out behind them. But it was Marco who held her attention. Marco, who looked like something pulled straight from a nightmare. His white shirt was torn and splattered with blood that wasn't his. His eyes were cold, dead focused. He moved like violence personified, like death wearing a suit. This wasn't the man who'd brought her tea. This was the man who'd earned every skull on his arm. "Where is she?" Marco's voice cut through the chaos. Calm. Deadly. Moretti appeared from behind a stack of crates, gun in hand but pointed at the floor. Even he looked shaken. "Butcho, we can talk about this." "Where is she?" Marco repeated, not moving, not blinking. "She's fine. We were just having a conversation about the debt. You took her from my home. You used a traitor in my house. You put your hands on her." Marco's voice dropped lower. "There's no conversation that ends well for you now." Moretti raised his gun. "Don't be stupid. We outnumber you." "No, you don't." The lights went out. All of them. The warehouse plunged into darkness. Lavinia heard movement. Heard Moretti's men shouting. Heard gunfire, but it was scattered, panicked. They were shooting at shadows. Then the emergency lights kicked in, casting everything in sickly yellow. And the warehouse looked different. Bodies on the ground. Moretti's men disarmed or down. Angelo and Marco's team standing like they'd barely broken a sweat. And Marco standing directly in front of Moretti, his hand wrapped around the older man's throat. "I told you what would happen if you touched her," Marco said quietly. "I told you I'd burn your entire organization to the ground. Did you think I was bluffing?" Moretti couldn't answer. Couldn't breathe. Marco looked past him and saw Lavinia. Their eyes met across the warehouse. She saw the moment his expression changed. Saw the cold fury melt into something else. Relief. Fear. Something raw and honest. He released Moretti, letting him collapse to the floor gasping. Then Marco crossed the warehouse in long strides, not stopping until he reached her. "Lavinia!" His hands cupped her face, checking for injuries. "Did they hurt you?" "I'm okay. My wrists are tied." Angelo appeared with a knife and cut the zip tie. Blood rushed back into Lavinia's hands, painful and sharp. Marco caught her as her knees buckled. "I've got you," he said. "I've got you." "How did you know?" she asked against his chest. "Rosa." They locked her in the pantry, but she managed to trigger the silent alarm with her phone. "By the time I got the alert, you were already gone. But I knew where they'd take you." His voice was rough. "I knew, and I still couldn't get here fast enough. You're here now. That's what matters." Marco pulled back enough to look at her. Blood streaked his face. His hands were shaking. "When I realized what happened, when I knew they'd taken you because of me, because someone I trusted sold us out." He stopped. "I can't do this anymore, Lavinia. I can't keep you safe in a world where people are always trying to hurt me through you. Then we leave. Tonight. Like we planned. It's not that simple. These organizations won't just let me walk away." "Then make them." Lavinia grabbed his shirt, holding him close. "You said you'd burn it all down for me. So do it. End this. All of it." Something shifted in Marco's eyes. Decision. Finality. He turned back to Moretti, who was still on his knees, coughing. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to call off your claim on Lavinia's estate. You're going to tell the Volkov crew and the DeLuca network that the debt dies with Dante Rossi. You're going to make it very clear that anyone who comes after her again will have to go through me. And I promise you, Vincent, they won't survive that." Moretti glared up at him. "And if I refuse, then I kill you here. Tonight. And I move on to every single person in your organization until there's no one left to refuse." The warehouse went silent. Even Moretti's remaining men seemed to be holding their breath. "You'd start a war over one woman?" Moretti asked. "I'd end a war over her." Marco's voice was absolute. "Your choice." Moretti looked at Lavinia, then back at Marco. Whatever he saw in Marco's eyes made him nod slowly. "Fine. The debt is cleared. The girl is yours. We're done." "Not yet." Marco pulled out his phone and held it in front of Moretti's face. "Call them. Now. I want to hear you clear her name." Moretti made the calls. First to someone named Volkov, then to a woman named DeLuca. Each time, he said the same thing. The debt was settled. Lavinia Duca was off limits. Anyone who touched her would answer to Marco Buccio personally. When he finished, Marco pocketed his phone. "Good. Now for the traitor." Angelo stepped forward, dragging a man Lavinia recognized. One of the guards from the estate. Young, maybe 25, with fear written all over his face. "Please," the guard begged. "They paid me. I needed the money. I didn't think." "You didn't think I'd find out?" Marco's voice was ice. "You let them into my home. You put her in danger. You betrayed every person who trusted you. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Marco looked at him for a long moment. Then he turned to Angelo. "He leaves the city tonight. If I ever see him again, anywhere, he dies. Make sure he understands." Angelo nodded and dragged the guard away. Lavinia touched Marco's arm. "You didn't kill him." "No, I didn't." Marco looked down at her. "Because you're making me better. Making me want to be better. And maybe that means not adding another skull to my collection." He lifted her into his arms like she weighed nothing. "Let's go home." "Wait." Lavinia looked back at Moretti. "What about him?" "He lives. For now. As long as he keeps his word." Marco started walking toward the door. "But if he ever changes his mind, I'll know. And I'll come back. And next time I won't be merciful." They left the warehouse. Outside, dawn was breaking over the docks, painting everything gold and pink. 3 black cars waited, engines running. Marco set Lavinia in the back seat of the first one, then climbed in beside her. Angelo got behind the wheel. As they pulled away, Lavinia looked back at the warehouse, at the scene of violence Marco had unleashed for her, at the broken door and the blood, and the end of one chapter of her life. "Is it really over?" she asked quietly. Marco took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "The debt part is over. The rest of it, the leaving, the building something new, that's just beginning." "Are you scared?" "Terrified." He smiled, and it was real this time. Soft. Honest. "But I'm also free. For the first time in 8 years, I'm actually free." Lavinia leaned against him, exhausted and hurting but alive. "Where do we go from here?" "Wherever we want. Far from the city. Far from everyone who knows our names." Marco pressed a kiss to her temple. "We find that quiet place I told you about. We read books in the afternoon. We drink terrible tea. We build a life where the most dangerous thing we face is deciding what to have for dinner." "That sounds perfect." "It does, doesn't it?" The car carried them away from the docks, away from the violence, away from the shadows that had defined both their lives for too long. Behind them, the sun rose higher, burning away the darkness. And ahead of them, somewhere beyond the city limits, waited the future they'd fought so hard to reach. Together. 1 year later. The house sat on a cliff overlooking the Mediterranean Sea, white stone walls and blue shutters that matched the water below. It wasn't big or fancy. Just 3 rooms, and a kitchen that opened onto a terrace where lemon trees grew in old clay pots. The kind of place where nobody asked questions, and neighbors minded their own business. The kind of place where 2 people could disappear and never be found. Lavinia woke to sunlight streaming through gauze curtains and the sound of waves against rocks. The bed beside her was empty but still warm. She smiled and stretched, her fingers finding the indent where Marco's head had been on the pillow. She got up and pulled on a cotton dress, white and simple, then padded barefoot to the kitchen. Coffee was already made, sitting in the old pot on the stove. A note lay beside it in Marco's handwriting. "Gone to the market. Back soon. Don't burn the bread again." Lavinia laughed. She'd only burned bread once, maybe twice, in the past year. Marco would never let her forget it. She poured coffee into a blue ceramic cup and carried it to the terrace. The view never got old. Azure water stretching to the horizon. Fishing boats dotting the distance. Gulls crying overhead. The air smelled like salt and wild herbs that grew on the hillside. This was home now. Had been for 12 months. 12 months since they'd left the city in the middle of the night with nothing but 2 bags and enough money to start over. 12 months since Marco had burned every bridge to his old life, made one final call to Rosa and Angelo to tell them he was done, and walked away from an empire he'd built with blood. Rosa had cried on the phone. Angelo had simply said, "Be happy, boss." Then they'd hung up and never called again. That was the deal. Clean break. No contact. No looking back. Lavinia had chosen a new name. Something simple and forgettable. Marco had done the same. They'd found this house through a local woman who didn't care about their past, only that they paid rent on time and kept to themselves. And they did keep to themselves. Mostly. Lavinia taught English to children in the village, 3 days a week. Marco worked at a boatyard, fixing engines and repairing hulls. His hands, which had once held guns and made men disappear, now held wrenches and paintbrushes. The tattoos on his arm drew questions sometimes, but he'd learned to tell people they were just art. Memories from another life. Nobody suspected. Nobody knew. They were just another couple who'd moved south for the quiet life. Lavinia heard footsteps on the stone path and turned. Marco appeared carrying 2 cloth bags, both full of vegetables and bread. He wore old jeans and a faded blue shirt, sleeves rolled up despite the morning heat. His beard was longer now, softer. His hair had grown out enough to curl at the ends. He looked nothing like the dangerous man who'd stepped out of the shadows in that corridor. He looked like someone who slept well at night. Someone who smiled easily. Someone who'd found peace. "You're up early," he said, climbing the steps to the terrace. "The sun woke me. You weren't there. I wanted to get the good tomatoes before Paolo bought them all." Marco set the bags down and kissed her forehead. "Did you drink all the coffee? There's half a pot left. Generous of you." He went inside and came back with his own cup, then settled into the chair beside hers. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sea, drinking coffee. This had become their morning ritual. No rush. No phones ringing. No urgent business. Just this. "I saw Caterina at the market," Marco said after a while. "She asked if we'd come to her daughter's wedding next month." "What did you tell her?" "I said we'd be honored." He glanced at Lavinia. "Is that okay? I know you don't like big crowds." "It's fine. I like Caterina. And her daughter deserves a good celebration. You're getting better at it. The people part." Lavinia smiled. "You are too. Remember when we first got here and you barely spoke to anyone? I was waiting for someone to recognize me. Took me 6 months to believe we were really safe. And now I think about what to make for dinner and whether the lemon tree needs water. Normal things. Boring things." He reached over and took her hand. "The best things." His thumb traced the thin gold band on her finger. They'd gotten married 4 months ago in a tiny church on the hill, just the 2 of them and the priest. No guests. No ceremony. Just vows spoken in a language neither of them had grown up with, but both had learned to love. Marco had cried when he'd slipped the ring on her finger. Cried and smiled and held her like she was the only real thing in the world. "Do you miss it?" Lavinia asked. "Any of it?" Marco thought about it. Really thought. "I miss Rosa's cooking. I miss Angelo's terrible jokes. But the rest of it, the violence, the fear, the always looking over my shoulder." He shook his head. "No, I don't miss that at all. What about the power? You ran everything. People feared you. People feared what I could do to them. That's not the same as respect. And it's definitely not the same as happiness." He looked at her. "I have more here, in this quiet house with you, than I ever had with all that power. This is real. Everything else was just surviving." Lavinia squeezed his hand. "I love you. I love you too." He pulled her up from her chair. "Dance with me. There's no music. We don't need music." He wrapped his arms around her waist and swayed gently, there on the terrace with the morning sun warm on their skin and the sound of waves below. Lavinia rested her head against his chest and listened to his heartbeat. Steady. Calm. Alive. "Do you ever wonder what happened to him?" Marco asked quietly. "Dante." Lavinia had thought about her ex-fiancé less and less as the months passed. The anger had faded. The hurt had healed. Now he was just a name attached to mistakes she'd learned from. Sometimes, she admitted, but mostly I'm just grateful. If he hadn't betrayed me, I never would have ended up in that corridor. Never would have met you. Never would have found this. That's a generous way to look at it. It's the truth. The worst thing that ever happened to me led to the best thing. She pulled back to look at him. You're the best thing, Marco. This life we built. This is everything I didn't know I needed. He cupped her face in his hands, those hands that had done terrible things but now only touched her with gentleness. I was so lost before you. I didn't even know it. I thought power and control meant I was living. But I was just existing, moving through darkness. His voice grew softer. You were the light that showed me the way out. We saved each other. Yeah, we did. He kissed her then, slow and sweet, tasting like coffee and promises kept. When they pulled apart, the sun had climbed higher, painting everything gold. Come on, Lavinia said. Help me make breakfast before we burn something. They went inside together, and Marco put on an old radio that played songs in Italian neither of them fully understood, but both hummed along to anyway. Lavinia chopped vegetables, while Marco cooked eggs. They moved around each other like they'd been doing this for decades instead of just 1 year. Easy. Natural. Right. After breakfast, they walked down to the beach, following the narrow path that wound through wild rosemary and thyme. The sand was white and warm. The water was clear enough to see fish darting between rocks. Marco rolled up his pants and waded in. Lavinia joined him, holding her dress up above her knees. The water was cold but perfect. I want to stay here forever, she said. Then we will. What if someone finds us? What if the past catches up? Marco looked out at the horizon. Then we'll deal with it. Together. But I don't think that's going to happen. I covered our tracks too well. And the people who mattered, the ones who might have looked for me, they got the message. I'm out. I'm done. And anyone smart knows not to pull me back in. And if they're not smart, then they'll learn. He smiled, but there was still an edge to it. The dangerous part of him hadn't disappeared completely. It had just gone to sleep. But I really don't think we need to worry. This is our life now. Just this. They stayed at the beach until the sun started to sink toward the water, turning everything orange and pink. Then they walked back up the path, hand in hand, their footprints disappearing in the sand behind them. That night, they sat on the terrace again. Candles flickered in glass jars. Dinner plates sat empty on the small table. Marco read a book while Lavinia sketched the view, something she started doing to fill the quiet hours. I'm happy, she said suddenly. Marco looked up from his book. Good. You deserve to be. So do you. I know. I'm finally starting to believe it. Lavinia set down her pencil and moved to sit beside him. He put his arm around her shoulders and she curled into his side, fitting perfectly like she always did. Do you think we'll ever tell anyone the truth? She asked. About who we were? Maybe someday. When we're old and it doesn't matter anymore. When it's just a story about people we used to be. Marco kissed the top of her head. But for now I like being nobody. I like being just Marco who fixes boats and burns bread and loves his wife more than anything in the world. I like being just Lavinia who teaches children and can't cook and marry the man who saved her life. We saved each other, Marco corrected gently. We did. They sat there as the stars came out, one by one, filling the sky with light. The Mediterranean whispered against the rocks below. Somewhere in the village, church bells rang the hour. And in that moment, everything made sense. The corridor where they'd met, the fear and violence that had brought them together, the choice to leave everything behind. All of it had led here, to this terrace, to this peace, to this love. Some wrong turns, it turned out, led to exactly the right destination. Marco's hand found hers in the darkness, their fingers intertwining. Thank you, he whispered. For what? For seeing past the monster. For believing I could be better. For choosing this life with me. Lavinia turned and kissed him softly. Thank you for stepping out of the shadows. For protecting me. For building this with me. They stayed there until the candles burned low and sleep started to pull at them. Then they went inside, locked the door, and climbed into bed together. And as Lavinia drifted off with Marco's arm around her waist and his breath warm against her neck, She thought about the text message that had broken her heart in that corridor 1 year ago. The betrayal that had felt like the end of everything. But it hadn't been the end. It had been the beginning. The beginning of strength, of love, of a life she never could have imagined but couldn't imagine living without. Outside, the Mediterranean kept its ancient rhythm, endless and eternal. Inside, two people who'd found each other in the darkness finally slept in the light. Together. Safe. Home. Thank you for staying with me until the very end of this incredible journey. If this story touched your heart, wait until you see what's coming next. It's even more powerful and inspiring than you can imagine. So don't go anywhere. Click on that video showing on your screen right now to dive into another amazing story that will absolutely blow your mind. Trust me, you won't regret it.